The scent of my small apartment was usually a comforting, if slightly mundane, blend of old paperbacks and the faint metallic tang of late-night coffee. For 10 years, it had been the backdrop to a singular, unwavering focus, building a future. That future lived in a string of numbers on a screen, $250,000 in my savings account. A decade of frugality and focus. Every brown bag lunch I'd eaten at my desk while coworkers went out. Every pair of shoes I'd stretched another season. Every freelance coding gig I squeezed into already packed weekends. It all added up to that $250,000. It was more than money, it was self-reliance, the foundation of my future. A house. A place that would be mine. No shared walls. No apologies. My parents always had opinions about my savings. "Are you sure you're managing it correctly, Logan?" my mother would chirp on our Sunday calls. It always came with that sugar-slick tone, concern wrapped in judgment. "Inflation, you know. Real estate's crazy. Maybe you should think about putting some of it toward your brother's company." Brandon. The axis of the family solar system. Younger, flashier, always in the spotlight. He needed funding for his latest startup, some vague app with world-changing promises and no actual product. Of course, my parents framed it as a noble sacrifice. "Family helps family," they said. But the help always flowed one way, from me, the invisible foundation, to him, the gilded tower. Still, I trusted them. That was my mistake. I'd opened the savings account back in high school and never changed the mailing address. They'd helped set it up. I even gave them online access once. Maybe they needed to transfer money, or maybe I was just too trusting. It felt normal. We were family. The first sign was so small I almost missed it. My laptop slowed down. Websites stalled. Apps froze. I assumed hardware issues, until one night, while checking the task manager, I found a suspicious program running quietly in the background. A quick search confirmed it: remote access software. Someone was watching. Someone was logging keystrokes. Someone had access. My gut twisted. I checked my online banking, my fingers shaking. The $250,000? Gone. One massive withdrawal. A single transaction dated last Tuesday. I drove to their house in a fog. Brandon lounged on the sofa. My mother gasped, clutching her pearls. My father's eyes hardened, then narrowed into something colder. "You gave us access," he said, his voice smug. "Thanks for your naivety, Logan. That money secured your brother's future. My future. My decade of work. Gone." And then I laughed. I couldn't help it. Because they didn't know, that money wasn't mine anymore. Not really. Not in the way they thought. They thought they'd won. That I'd crumble, beg, lash out, cry, or plead. Instead, I stood in their hallway, smiling. Not because I was okay. Not because I wasn't furious. But because something in me had snapped into focus. The years of subtle humiliation, backhanded compliments, and emotional bartering, it all condensed into a single, perfect moment of clarity. I looked around the house. The same couch I'd slept on after college when I couldn't afford rent. The family photos that somehow always centered Brandon, even in group shots. The bookshelf where my awards had once sat, until they were accidentally misplaced, to make room for Brandon's graduation plaque. The theft wasn't just about money. It was about entitlement. Power. Control. And they didn't know what I'd really been working on. Yes, the savings were real. But the account they emptied? That wasn't the full picture. 3 months ago, I'd moved the bulk of my savings into a new investment vehicle, one tied to my LLC, under an entirely different EIN, registered to a post office box in another state. The money in the original account was a decoy. A paper trail I kept active for sentimental reasons and, if I'm honest, to keep my parents from snooping elsewhere. The real money, the real future, was untouched. They hadn't stolen my house. They'd stolen a ghost. And now they'd exposed themselves. I left their house that night without another word. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because the best revenge wasn't confrontation. It was silence. It was success. It was the plan I'd already put in motion. And they wouldn't see it coming. I didn't go back to my apartment that night. I drove in silence, not toward home, but to the co-working space I'd quietly leased 2 months earlier under my LLC. It was nothing fancy, a converted warehouse with exposed beams, free coffee, and just enough space to feel like a reset button. It wasn't meant to be permanent. It was meant to be a launch pad. But that night, it became a war room. I fired up my desktop, disconnected it from Wi-Fi, and went full forensic mode. First, I cloned my entire drive. Then I traced every backdoor, every lingering process. They hadn't just used a simple remote app. They'd installed multiple layers of intrusion, including browser extensions, a keylogger, and even screen capture utilities. This wasn't casual overreach. This was premeditated. Coordinated. They'd been watching me for months. My stomach turned at the thought. Every line of code I'd written. Every invoice. Every journal entry. Every email. They'd read it all. The realization hit like a punch. I was never the independent adult they pretended to support. I was a resource. A safety net. A quiet reservoir they could tap when Brandon's latest business pitch flopped, or he needed a new condo in Miami. Suddenly, so many things made sense. Why my mother always knew when I booked a new contract gig. Why my father asked oddly specific questions about which vendor platform I preferred. Why Brandon once joked, "You better not get married without telling us, we'd spot it in your credit history." It hadn't been a joke. It had been a threat wrapped in sibling banter. I opened a clean document and began outlining what I'd do next. Not revenge. Not theatrics. Just protection. Exposure. Precision. Step 1: lock everything down: banking, cloud drives, domain registrars, personal health portals. Everything they might still access. Step 2: alert my actual bank about the fraudulent withdrawal. Not to recover the funds, but to trigger the audit trail. Step 3: let it simmer. Don't escalate. Let them think they won. That was the part one enjoyed most. Letting them think they were clever. Letting them bask in the illusion that they'd cut me off at the knees. Because the deeper game was already in motion, and they were a step behind. 2 days later, Brandon posted a video on Instagram, him popping champagne, thanking a silent investor for believing in his latest app. I watched the clip on mute, my jaw clenched. It wasn't the money that stung. It was the way they celebrated using what wasn't theirs. My parents had never posted about my milestones. Not when I landed my first 6-figure contract. Not when I got certified as a senior engineer. But for Brandon? A man who'd been bankrupt twice before 30? They treated him like a prophet. And now, apparently, a self-made one. I went to work in silence. Ate in silence. Rebuilt everything in silence. And it was in that silence that I started planning something else. My exit. Not just from their manipulation. From their entire narrative. I started drafting a legal document, a revocation of any financial power of attorney. Something they'd slipped into the background years ago. Just in case. I went to a financial planner, who nearly choked on his coffee when I explained what had happened. "You're telling me they stole from you, and they don't even know you let them?" "No," I said. "They think they did." He laughed. "Okay. So what now?" "No," I said. "I build." And that's what I did. Line by line. Contract by contract. With the real money. In the real account. The one they'd never find. 3 weeks passed without a single word exchanged between me and my family. Brandon was on social media almost daily now. New sunglasses, business meetings with poorly cropped celebrity lookalikes, and endless hashtags. #hustle, #founderlife, #blessed. My parents, meanwhile, posted vacation photos from some overpriced Airbnb in Napa Valley. They looked euphoric. It was eerie. You'd think people who just committed grand larceny against their own son would at least keep a low profile. But that's the thing about entitlement, they don't think they've done anything wrong. To them, it was already theirs. In that quiet, I was building. I set up a new LLC, separate from my app business, this time for real estate acquisitions. The down payment for my house, my real house fund, untouched and secure, was sitting in a trust account under that company's name. Not even I could pull it directly without a second signer. That second signer? An independent attorney whose job was to ensure no funds left the account unless the transaction aligned with my terms. No gifts, no loans, no shared access. At the same time, I hired a cybersecurity specialist to run a full sweep on every device I'd ever used, personal and business. We found remnants of scripts my father had embedded in browser extensions years ago, hidden in a parenting filter, ironically labeled SafeNet Guardian. The irony wasn't lost on me. We nuked everything. Then I rebuilt from zero. New laptop. Fresh devices. Clean installs. Encrypted cloud services. Burner phone numbers for bank authentication. I even moved apartments, using a business address to reroute my mail until the transition was complete. I wasn't just locking them out, I was disappearing. One morning, I received an email from my dad. The subject line read simply, "Hope you're okay." No greeting. No apology. No mention of the withdrawal. Just 2 sentences. "You've been quiet. If you're having trouble understanding the family's decision, maybe we can talk it out." I didn't reply. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I did. If you can steal a future and call it a decision, then you don't deserve my voice anymore. Later that week, I visited a notary and executed the final revocation of financial power of attorney. I had the documents delivered to their address via certified mail, signature required. It wasn't an announcement. It was a boundary. A legal one. A week after that, I filed paperwork transferring full ownership of my software company from me personally to a trust managed by my new LLC. It was now an asset protected by corporate law, untouchable without a court order. They hadn't just lost access to my finances. They'd lost access to my future. But the most satisfying moment came quietly. It was a Tuesday. Rainy. I was at a diner I used to frequent in college. Cheesy booths, watery coffee, reliable pancakes. I sat with my laptop and signed closing documents for a house 3 states away. Modest. Detached. Mine. No one knew where I was. No one had the address. No shared title. No liabilities. The money they stole? Gone, yes. But they hadn't touched what mattered. They'd stolen my past. But I'd already invested in my future. The silence didn't last. Not because I broke it. Because they did. A certified envelope arrived at my business address, postmarked from my parents' lawyer. Inside was a letter, wrapped in cold professionalism and barely concealed threat. They were requesting clarification regarding my unprecedented financial behavior. Specifically, they wanted to understand the unexpected asset migration from my accounts they had no legal access to anymore. It wasn't a demand. It was bait. They wanted to know how much I knew, what I'd discovered, what I might be planning. I didn't respond. But I sent a copy to my own attorney and flagged the names of the firms CC'd on the footer. 2 of them specialized in estate law. 1 in corporate disputes. They were planning something. Or at least hoping I'd panic and respond. Instead, I waited. And while I waited, I went deeper. I hired a private digital forensics firm out of Chicago, recommended by my cybersecurity contact, to comb through old hardware. Not just mine, but the devices I'd once helped set up for my parents years ago. I still had admin access on 2 of them from remote support. What they found made my stomach flip. They'd created mirrored folders, backups of my emails, saved automatically through third-party software tied to my Google credentials. Synced every month. They'd had access to more than just my banking, my negotiations, my therapy emails, a draft of a breakup message I never sent, even personal health data scraped from my fitness app. My life hadn't just been observed. It had been archived, cataloged, indexed. And the worst part? They'd shared some of it. Not publicly, but with Brandon. There were references in text messages, snippets only someone with my login could have known. "You always stress too much, bro, chill. I read your therapy thing." That therapy thing had never been shared with anyone. It was a PDF report from my counselor I'd never even downloaded. It had just existed in my inbox. Until they accessed it. This wasn't just control. It was psychological warfare dressed in concern. I doubled down. I met with my attorney again and reviewed every clause of my estate plan. Removed my parents from any hypothetical rights to my business or residuals. Rewrote my healthcare directives. Updated the beneficiaries on my accounts, now anonymous charities and a disaster relief fund. No next of kin. No family fallback. Only intentional decisions. By me. For me. The final move came in the form of a message, not to them, but to myself. I booked a week away. Not a vacation. A cleanse. I packed light. Left my phone. Took only a notebook, a burner number for emergencies, and a watch. No internet. No noise. I went to the mountains, an old cabin I'd reserved through a friend of a friend. And for 7 days I sat with myself. I wrote out the timeline of my life. What was mine? What had been taken? What I had reclaimed? When I came down from the mountain, I wasn't angry anymore. I was certain. Certain that some people don't deserve explanation. Certain that revenge doesn't look like payback, it looks like freedom. And most of all, certain that I didn't need to win anything. Because they'd already lost me. The hardest part wasn't walking away. It was staying gone. Because silence isn't just peaceful. It's loud too. Deafening, when you've spent your whole life adjusting your volume to keep others comfortable. Even in the new house, quiet, sunlit, untraceable, I'd find myself pausing before speaking, checking shadows that didn't exist. I'd grown so used to being watched that the absence of surveillance felt like standing on a cliff with no railing. But every day, the stillness became easier to trust. I cooked for myself. Slowly. Mindfully. Measured recipes. Fresh groceries. I read actual books, not screens. Long walks. Cold air. No tracking. I journaled, not to defend my decisions, but to hear my own voice again. Then, out of nowhere, Brandon called. Not a burner number. Not a message through a lawyer. He called my encrypted work line, a number so new and buried, it wasn't even attached to my name. Hey man, he said. Listen. I think we should talk. I didn't hang up. I didn't speak either. He filled the silence. You just disappeared, dude. Mom's been losing it. Dad's pissed. But I told them, like, you're probably just thinking or something. He laughed, like it was a joke. A phase. A glitch in the Logan program. They don't get it, but I do. You needed space, right? I said nothing. Brandon continued. I don't know if you're mad about the money or what, but come on, bro. It's not like you were using it. You're good at saving. That's your thing. I'm good at spending. That's mine. He actually said that. Like we were trading Pokemon cards. Like my decade of sacrifice was a shared family joke he'd just taken a little too far. Anyway, he added, I told Mom you'd come around. Just let us know when you're done with this little reset or whatever. Cool? Click. I sat with the silence afterward, holding the phone like it might bite. His tone. The language. The casual entitlement. It was all still there, just wrapped in feigned concern instead of demands. The performance had shifted, but the script hadn't changed. They weren't worried about me. They were worried they couldn't reach me. That night, I opened my journal and wrote. They've replaced accountability with nostalgia. They wanted the version of me that didn't challenge, didn't question, didn't say no. But that version had died the day they chose to cash out my future for someone else's delusion. A week later, a letter came, this time from my mother. Handwritten. Flowing cursive. Perfumed paper, like she thought scent could erase memory. Dear Logan, we know you've been distant, and we're trying to respect that. But family is all we have. Brandon's business is doing well, and we truly believe this will elevate all of us. I hope one day you'll understand. No apology. Just justification. As if their theft was a strategic family investment. I didn't respond. But I kept the letter. Not for evidence. For reminder. I returned to my routines. Updated my software backend. Made progress on a second app. Signed a licensing deal with a health platform I respected. I planted a small garden. Not for food. For proof. That things could grow in silence. That healing doesn't require forgiveness. That sometimes, the only way to reclaim peace is to stop asking for it, and simply build it. The next message came in a different form. A LinkedIn request, from Brandon. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. But there it was. His smirking profile photo, his tagline. Visionary founder, disrupting the future. I didn't block him. I archived the notification and left it there, unread, unengaged, unanswered. He wanted visibility. I gave him invisibility. The thing about disappearing on your own terms is that it doesn't create absence, it creates questions. They were starting to notice. A mutual family friend texted me. "Hey, your mom mentioned you moved out of state? Hope everything's okay." I never told her that. But my mother was planting seeds. Little stories. Positioning herself as the worried parent of a misunderstood genius son who had gone reclusive. The kind of narrative that absolved her of accountability while keeping her in the spotlight of concern. Classic PR. I kept writing. Not just in journals, but code. The second app was different, less startup chic, more personal. A self-tracking tool for people healing from emotional manipulation. Private journaling, goal setting, pattern spotting. I built it because I needed it. But as I shared the concept quietly in small forums, it began catching on. Not viral. Organic. Real people. People like me. Users began writing in, sharing their own stories. Parents who controlled through guilt. Partners who monitored phone locations. Bosses who blurred personal and professional boundaries. I wasn't alone. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to justify that truth. That week, I implemented a new feature in the app, a digital boundary journal. A space where users could log interactions that felt off, just so they could start seeing the patterns for themselves. It was subtle, but revolutionary. We'd been trained to second-guess ourselves so often, we needed technology just to validate our instincts. And I wasn't building this for clout. I was building it because somewhere, another version of me was still trapped in that surveillance-soaked apartment, wondering why his body clenched every time the phone rang. Meanwhile, my family started slipping into the final stage of their cycle, guilt. It came through coded messages. A forwarded memory, from an old family vacation, me and Brandon building a sandcastle. A photo of my childhood dog with the caption, "She always waited by the door for you." These weren't apologies. They were lures. Little nostalgia bombs meant to weaken the wall I'd built, meant to turn clarity into doubt. But clarity, I'd learned, doesn't need armor. It just needs repetition. I didn't react. I didn't rage post. I didn't call a cousin to vent. I just returned to the garden, watered the tomatoes, and adjusted the trellis. Then I made dinner, opened my laptop, and got back to work. I'd become someone who didn't just escape toxicity. I was building tools for others to escape it too. Not to burn bridges, but to show people they could cross one, and never look back. 2 weeks later, an email came through my public site's contact form. It was from my father. No subject line. No apology. Just, "We're willing to sit down and talk." No lawyers. Just family. Let us explain. Explain what? That they treated my life like a contingency fund? That privacy was optional if it meant protecting Brandon's ego. I didn't reply. I didn't delete it either. I let it sit there, like the last voicemail of someone who didn't realize the line had already gone cold. I began working with a small group of beta testers for the app, people navigating estrangement, digital boundaries, and post-narcissistic recovery. What started as a personal tool was now turning into something real, something useful. One user, a high school teacher, messaged me. "This is the first time I've been able to track my emotional safety without feeling like I was overreacting." Another wrote, "My dad used to monitor my phone through family apps. This made me realize I was still letting him rent space in my head." Each message reminded me, silence isn't absence, it's intention. And healing isn't loud, it's steady. And the best part? They still didn't know where I was. Not physically. Not financially. Not emotionally. I wasn't in hiding. I was just finally home. It arrived on a Wednesday afternoon, wrapped in a bland envelope and mailed to my LLC's public business address. A handwritten letter. Not from my parents. From my uncle, my dad's younger brother. The one relative I always thought had potential for neutrality. For honesty. Inside, he'd written only one paragraph. "I don't know what happened between you all. Your dad says you're going through something. Your mom cries a lot. Brandon acts like nothing's wrong. I won't take sides, but I will say this. If what they did was even half as serious as you make it sound, you're right to be gone. Just don't let it harden you. I read it twice. Then again. Then I folded it and put it in my journal. Not because it changed anything, but because it acknowledged something no one else had. That there was a before and after. That maybe, just maybe, I wasn't crazy. A few days later, I stood in my kitchen, spooning homemade chili into Tupperware, when it hit me, I hadn't thought about the money in weeks. Not the $250,000. Not the account. Not the betrayal. It was just gone. Not forgotten. But finally irrelevant. That's when I knew I was done. Done waiting for an apology. Done wondering what they'd try next. Done needing anything from people who saw me as an asset, not a son. That night, I drafted a final email. Not to them. To myself. Subject line. Permission granted. You're allowed to stop proving your pain. You're allowed to keep the door closed. You're allowed to thrive without an audience. It wasn't closure. It was clarity. The next morning, I launched the app publicly. No countdowns. No press releases. No influencer campaigns. Just a soft rollout to my mailing list and a Reddit post in a mental health forum. Within hours, it was trending. Not because it was flashy. Because it was real. People shared stories. Reviews. Screenshots of their first journal entries. Comments like, "I didn't know I needed this until I saw it." And as I watched the feedback roll in, something inside me clicked. They'd stolen my savings, but I'd built something that mattered. They'd controlled my past, but I'd created a future. 3 days later, a package arrived. No return label. Inside was a photo album, my baby pictures. Some I didn't even remember ever seeing. And a note, written in my mother's cursive. "In case you want to remember the good times. We always loved you." That was the moment I knew the cycle was restarting. The guilt, the rewriting, the curated nostalgia. But I didn't fall for it. I didn't rage or cry. I didn't respond. I walked outside, dug a small hole beneath the plum tree I'd planted that spring, and buried the album there. Let it compost into something useful. And I walked back inside. To my house. To my garden. To my inbox, full of strangers telling me I'd helped them feel sane for the first time in years. And I smiled. Not because I'd won. But because I'd finally stopped playing the game. The plum tree was bearing fruit. It startled me, the first time I saw the color, deep purple pushing through green. I crouched next to it, fingers tracing the soft fuzz of a ripe one. I hadn't expected it to grow so soon. I planted it as an act of closure. A place to bury the photo album. I didn't imagine it would give anything back. But here it was. Giving. That's what healing turned out to be. Not a war. A harvest. The app was now in 5 languages. We'd hit a milestone of 100,000 users, quietly. No investors. No splashy ads. Just one community recommending it to another. Therapists emailed me for API access. Teachers asked for classroom versions. Even a couple of nonprofit orgs reached out to integrate it into recovery programs. But it never felt like mine alone anymore. It felt shared. Built from something hard, but no longer heavy. I spent mornings in the garden, afternoons in the workspace, evenings walking trails no one could track. There were no more cameras watching. No inboxes being mirrored. No guilt-shaped phone calls. My days were mine. My mind was mine. And no one, not Brandon, not my parents, not their lawyers, knew what I did with them. Then, one morning, a letter arrived. No return address. Postmarked from my childhood town. I stood at my mailbox holding it, thumb on the crease, debating whether to open it. I didn't. I brought it inside. Set it on my desk. Left it unopened for a week. I didn't need to know what was inside. Not because I feared it, but because I knew it couldn't change anything. That's what power looks like. Not the ability to dominate, but the ability to choose what enters your world. Eventually, I burned it. On a quiet Sunday. The plum tree watched. Later that evening, I received a message through the app's admin panel. A woman named Leah, mid-40s, said she'd found the app while searching how to escape parents who smile when they hurt you. She thanked me. Said she used the boundary journal daily. Said it helped her leave. Said she planted her own plum tree. I replied. Take your time. Fruit shows up when it's ready. I closed my laptop. Stepped outside. Took one ripe plum from the tree. Bit into it. It was sweet. Softer than I expected. Not perfect. But mine. And for the first time in a decade, I didn't flinch when someone said, family. Because I'd finally built my own. Out of code. And roots. And silence that answered only to me.